Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're taking a dramatic yet completely impartial look at the economics behind the 2026 World Cup ticketing controversy. We're going to examine the numbers, the strategies, and the market forces that took a massive global celebration and turned it into a fiery financial debate.
$5,785. Just let that sink in for a second. Now, this wasn't for a luxury suite. We're not talking about some VIP hospitality package with free drinks. This staggering number was the absolute minimum baseline price, literally the cheapest possible ticket to just get in the door for the World Cup final.
So you're probably wondering, how did the World Cup become so unaffordable? How did an event that is built on this massive, widespread global passion reach a price point that just completely locked out everyday fans? Well, let's unpack the corporate and economic mechanics behind this unprecedented pricing crisis.
Part 1. The $5,785 broken promise. To really grasp the scale of this shock, we have to look at what fans were originally promised versus what they actually had to pay. When the US, Canada, and Mexico first won the bid for this tournament, they made a specific promise. The absolute maximum price for a seat at the final would be $1,550. And honestly, historical context makes this even wilder. Just 4 years prior in Qatar, the most expensive ticket you could buy for the final was $1,600. But for the 2026 equivalent here in North America, that highest baseline price exploded to $10,990. And if you looked at the resale market, prices skyrocketed to an unbelievable $33,000 for a single football match.
So, how exactly did we get from that initial promise to those astronomical numbers? Well, the timeline paints a pretty clear picture. Between October 2025 and April 2026, FIFA quietly raised prices. And this wasn't just a bump for the final match either. They hiked prices on 90 out of the 104 matches. We're talking about an average increase of 34% right before the June kickoff.
Part 2. Bait, switch, and dynamic pricing.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how these unprecedented price hikes were technically executed behind the scenes. It all comes down to dynamic pricing. For the very first time in World Cup history, FIFA implemented this model. It's basically the practice of fluctuating prices based on real-time demand. But the really crucial detail here is that it was rolled out with zero warning, zero transparency, and absolutely no limits on how high those prices could climb.
Let's look at what this actually meant for real people. Take one fan from New Jersey, for example. He waited in an online queue for hours and finally managed to pay $515 for a specific Category 1 seat in Seattle, only to get an email later showing his seat had been moved completely behind the goal on the opposite side of the stadium. And he wasn't alone. Thousands of American and Canadian fans reported this exact same bait and switch. They quickly realized FIFA had quietly changed the stadium's seating maps after the tickets were already bought and paid for.
Part 3. The government steps in.
Now, when you have thousands of consumers dealing with bait-and-switch seating and wild dynamic pricing, the story escalates really fast from just a sports complaint to a major legal intervention. All this consumer frustration triggered a massive legal response. In fact, 3 state governments launched investigations into FIFA's ticketing practices at the exact same time. The New York Attorney General Letitia James and the New Jersey Attorney General Jennifer Davenport officially subpoenaed FIFA, legally demanding to see their internal documents, and California quickly followed suit, sending a formal letter demanding answers. The New Jersey Attorney General concisely summed up the legal and consumer criticism with this quote. She called the ticketing process a gauntlet of confusion, fake scarcity, and impossibly high prices. This was a huge signal that regulatory bodies weren't just brushing this off as a bad fan experience, but were actually looking at it as potentially problematic market behavior.
Part 4. Empty seats and defenses.
Which brings us to the climax of our explainer. Because what happens when you price a massive sporting event so high that even your most diehard fans can't afford to go? Well, the physical and financial consequences become literally impossible to hide. Exactly 2 days before kickoff, 180,000 tickets remained entirely unsold. 180,000. Let that number sink in. FIFA had effectively priced its own fans out of their own World Cup.
And the immediate fallout? It was highly visible. Even for massively anticipated host nation games, like the USA opening match against Paraguay, more than 4,400 seats were sitting empty on the actual day of the game. Behind the scenes, it caused an absolute scramble of secret, last-minute price slashes across all 104 matches. Plus,
70% of FIFA's block-booked hotel rooms ended up being returned because of the low demand.
Now, to make sure we're taking a perfectly balanced, objective look at this whole thing, we absolutely have to look at the organization's response. FIFA President Gianni Infantino strongly defended the pricing structure. He argued that the prices simply reflected the economic realities of the North American market. He also made the point that cheaper tickets would have just ended up being scalped on the black market anyway, and that this revenue is absolutely essential to fund football development globally.
So how do critics counter that defense? It largely boils down to one major economic concept: monopoly. Critics point out that FIFA operates with zero competition. I mean, no other organization sells World Cup tickets, right? There's no substitute. So legal experts argue that when a single entity sets all the prices with absolutely no outside regulation, they aren't just reflecting a market, they are actively exploiting a monopoly.
Part 5. The verdict on FIFA.
And this brilliantly illustrates the broader impact of this pricing strategy on fan trust, especially when we compare it to other major global tournaments. Take the Euro 2024 final in Berlin, for instance. The cheapest ticket was the equivalent of $83. Compare that to the $5,785 starting price for the 2026 World Cup final. That is 70 times more expensive. Furthermore, UEFA clearly saw the public outcry over FIFA's model, and they've already stepped up to promise that for Euro 2028, nearly half of all tickets will cost under $70.
The backlash to FIFA's approach was widespread, and it was completely international. Supporter groups called it a monumental betrayal, going so far as to file a formal complaint with the European Commission. And the pushback even reached the highest political spheres. The president of the host nation himself, President Trump, publicly refused to pay the roughly $1,000 price just for nosebleed seats to the opening game.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty provocative question. Was FIFA simply adapting to the North American market to fund global football development, just like they claim? Or did they betray the everyday fans who made the World Cup what it is in the first place? I really want to know what you think. Drop your verdict in the comments below. We read every single one. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.